Welcome to Innovation Roots Studio. I'm your host Noopur, and today I'm really excited to have Alexei Zheglov with us. Hi Alex.
Hello, Noopur.
So Alex, how can we ensure that we take right risk in an enterprise?
All right, well, that's an interesting question. I'll break it up into several parts. First, we have to acknowledge that running an enterprise is about taking risks. Some people think it's about producing business value, but I beg to differ. Enterprises, since thousands of years ago, actually took risks. Those risks eventually turned into gains and losses. And when gains outnumbered losses, perhaps by significant margins, that's how fortunes were created since millennia ago. However, if losses start exceeding gains, well, perhaps adjusted for some amount of capital available, then the enterprise simply ceases to exist. And enterprises want to avoid such a fate above all. So it's important to see an enterprise as a risk-taking entity. Once we acknowledge, now we can get to the heart of your question. Perhaps we have to look at the risks that we have already taken before we take any additional risks. And we have to understand the nature of those risks first. To that end, the Kanban community has developed a unique approach to assessing risk, and it's reflected in our multidimensional risk assessment frameworks, which can be customized to each specific enterprise. Why multidimensional? Well, said one of my clients, a banking executive, he said, well, we had some process consultants at our bank, and they gave us a process framework in which you consider every project that you can possibly do, and you calculate some numbers for it, and eventually you reduce it all to a single number, and you prioritize everything by that number. But I'm not buying this, and I'm seeing how this doesn't work in practice, because our business is more complicated than that. And there are clearly multiple dimensions to the risks that we're taking. So we need a better approach. Well, enterprise services planning provides that approach with custom risk assessment frameworks. So we identify different categories of risks that your particular enterprise is taken, and yes, some of those dimensions are quite common, and so we see them occur in one such risk assessment framework to the next, and some risk dimensions are unique to one particular enterprise. So we usually identify a framework that includes a handful of dimensions. Some of them are standard and some of them are custom. And then for each, we design an appropriate scale of risk categories, and sometimes those are defined qualitatively, yet factually, and sometimes they're identified quantitatively and appropriately for low variation risk variables, and sometimes appropriately for high variation risk variables that may exhibit, let's say, exponential growth of some numbers. So that's how we help enterprises assess the risks that they have currently taken with their portfolios and see if their risks are appropriately hedged, if they have taken risks of certain variety, so their eggs are not in the same basket, so to speak, and that also the risks that they have taken are commensurate with the rewards that their enterprise is seeking. And finally, the third part of my answer deals with the risks that we are about to take, the new risks in addition that we have taken now. So if you can assess every, let's say, upcoming product initiative or a major product against the custom risk assessment framework that is created for a particular enterprise, now you can see how the new project can, let's say, upset a balance of risks that already taken by your enterprise. And that informs you that maybe you should start some projects or product initiatives right now, defer some of them until later, and thus continuously pursue a strategy that involves a healthy long-term risk allocation. All of this is enabled through our fairly stable guidance on enterprise services planning, which is, of course, accessible through Link Kanban University.
Change is difficult to sell and even difficult to manage. What skills the leader should possess to manage change?
All right, well, the skills that a leader needs to manage change may actually relate to what kind of change they're seeking. So if they're seeking to, let's say, reinvent the identity of a large global organization, they need very strong leadership skills. We may be talking about, let's say, legendary executives like Lou Gerstner of IBM. At the same time, if the change that we need is to create some transparency for, let's say, overburdened teams in your organization, that doesn't take a whole lot of leadership skills, and it can produce a significant change with, let's say, an introduction of a relatively unsophisticated proto-Kanban system. So we can certainly identify those extremes and everything in between with the help of, let's say, Kanban maturity model, particularly the leadership extensions of that model. Selling change is indeed difficult, therefore the best way to sell it is not to sell it. Instead of selling change, connect with an actual business, a business owner, perhaps a manager who is trying to solve a problem, who takes responsibility for delivering some product or service to customers, and help them solve that problem using something out of your methodological playbook, whatever that might be. That would be a good advice to many change agents out there. So if you try to sell them on your methodology, you will likely run into a lot of resistance. If you try to solve somebody's problem, basically the words buy-in may disappear from your vocabulary because you never need it.
So Alex, what are the common obstacles for change initiative that prevents achieving the desired business outcome?
All right, well, where do I start? Well, for starters, there's emotional resistance. People resist change initiatives because whatever change is being proposed, well, they take it emotionally, they think it may affect their livelihood somehow, their self-esteem, and usually not in a good way. And so sometimes they're open about it, sometimes they're passive-aggressive about it, but that's what happens out there in the real world. There are some other problems. Sometimes a change initiative doesn't actually state any explicit business outcomes. That might be your problem right there. Instead, it may state its desired outcomes, such as transition everyone to Agile, or go Agile, or implement some process methodology. And so then the change initiative may fail at achieving business outcomes because, well, never stated them explicitly to begin with. And sometimes the change initiative may explicitly state its desired business outcomes, but fail to deliver on those because it uses tools or an approach that is essentially incongruent with those business outcomes. Sometimes the organization will go for a relatively shallow implementation of some methodology that can only deliver a relatively modest amount of benefit, and that benefit will be very modest compared to, let's say, the stated business objective. So simply use the wrong tool for the job. And sometimes a change initiative may employ a tool that is way too sophisticated for the desired business outcome, and that may prove too costly, and so the company will quit before they're done with it, or it may fail to install because the current level of organizational maturity is simply not compatible with, let's say, a tool of that sophistication. So there is a number of reasons. I'll summarize them as not stating those outcomes to begin with, emotional resistance, and using tools that are incongruent with stated objectives.
Okay. So, how to manage emotions when initiating organizational transformation?
Well, my preferred way of managing such emotions is what we say in the Kanban community is be like water and try to flow around the rock as opposed to press against that rock and try to crush it. So the rock represents some source of emotional resistance. And in the coaching masterclass, we actually teach coaches, change agents, internal consultants, people who want to influence others, how to recognize various forms of emotional resistance. Some of those forms are individual, and they go to an individual's source of self-esteem, their identity. And sometimes those sources are of a group nature, such as a group of individuals, which could be a team, which could be a department within the company, could be a community of practice, could be a group of individuals that somehow identify together, perhaps through acquisitions that the company had in the past. Sometimes it could be regional, particularly in multinational companies. We see how one country office can be kind of a separate tribe from the rest of the company. So you have to be able to read such identities and essentially see how some proposed change will affect their self-esteem, their security, their sense of value. And sometimes you can see how the proposed change can, let's say, amplify the positives about it, the sense of security, the sense of value, and how sometimes it can diminish it. And if it's going to diminish it, then the tribe won't take it lightly. And so if you notice the potential for, let's say, a negative outcome of the change, you can steer clear of it. However, if you can do change in a way that amplifies the sense of security or the sense of value of a group of individuals that you're trying to influence, then the change is much more likely to be adopted by this group, much more likely to stick.
So, Alex, when a change is an improvement?
Well, there may be multiple opinions on this. My preferred point of view is the improvement has to be externally validated. So if we implement some change in an organization, the ultimate arbiter is the customer. So if we made the change in the organization, then we really made the change to how the organization delivers its products and services to its customers. And those products and services may get better, they may get worse, they may get fitter for its customer's purpose. Also, the change in an organization may change how the company is able to sense its customers' needs and respond to that by tweaking its products and services so that they remain fit for their purpose, right? And so customers are ultimately the arbiters of that. So if the product or service passes the fitness test, that validates the ways in which the organization is working. And if it's a result of our changing those ways, that validates the improvement initiative.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks for sharing your insights with us. It was wonderful having you with us in our studio. Thank you so much.
Noopur, thank you very much for inviting me this evening. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.